In this episode of Locked On Capitals, I talk with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders, and we talk about Barry Trotz. What were the Islanders thinking about getting rid of Barry Trotz? And we talk about the season that the Islanders had and the Capitals. We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. This podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check that out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So in this edition, I am joined by Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders and the Locked On NHL show on Locked On. And we talk about the New York Islanders. We talk about them moving on from Barry Trotz and what that means for the Islanders. We talk about how major of an impact COVID had on that Islanders team, and maybe that's why they made an early exit in this season. And then we talk about the Capitals, and we talk about the future of the Capitals, the netminding situation. We'll talk about all of that next. In this episode of Locked On Capitals, I am joined by Locked On Islanders' Gil Martin. He also does Locked On NHL. Gil, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so in this episode, we are going to talk a little bit about the New York Islanders and the Washington Capitals. What changes need to be made? Of course, they didn't get the result that they were looking for. Both teams ended their season sooner than they wanted to. But first of all, I want to start off this show by talking about how you are one of the OGs of the Locked On NHL Network. Why don't you start off by talking about your history with the network?
Well, I actually started with the network, I think it was November 2 seasons ago. So I think within a month of the NHL channel opening up, I was on there. And it's been great to watch it all evolve. At first we were doing just audio and the format was a little bit different. And then we've added different components and now we're up on YouTube, which is always fun. But, to me, the camaraderie and, the interaction between the hosts and being able to have all these other experts to lean on, if something comes up with the Capitals, I know I can go talk to you and get some insight. And it really adds to everything you're trying to do, both on Locked On NHL and on this, each individual team channel.
Yeah, because you're kind of pulling double duty right now. You still are doing work with the NHL channel on Locked On. Tell us a little bit about that. I look at the ratings, and that is the top-rated program on Locked On NHL. How do you like working in that aspect where it kind of takes you out of your comfort zone, or I assume your comfort zone of working with the Islanders? You have to be kind of well-versed on every team in the NHL.
You do. You have to be prepared. And, usually – I do the Monday show by myself, and then I co-host the Friday show with Rachel Donner. And, the Friday show is more looking forward to the weekend and talking about the biggest stories heading into the weekend. But for the Monday show, I'll spend the weekend watching games, reading about what happened, watching video clips and reading articles, and then picking 3 hosts whose teams have done something important or controversial and do a lot of prep work and then interview them and go from there. But I love it. I really do. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, so just some great work that you do over there for Locked On Islanders and Locked On NHL. I think it's just kind of important to get to know the hosts around the network. Oftentimes you see these faces and you kind of know the history. And I heard it alluded to that you were one of the originals, so I thought I would ask you about that. So switching gears to the Islanders, the biggest news, of course, is that the New York Islanders parted ways with Barry Trotz. And it's a bit of an interesting move because other than this year, I know that they didn't get the result that they wanted to, but I think that COVID played a huge role with the New York Islanders this season, probably more than some of the other teams out there. What are your thoughts about them replacing Barry Trotz and plugging in Lane Lambert? It's a questionable move. What are your thoughts?
I was surprised. I have to admit, I did not see that coming. And the impression that I'm getting from my sources is that I don't think Lou Lamoriello was leaning in the direction of letting go Barry Trotz until after he did the exit interviews with the players. And I think the exit interviews just sort of, if he had any doubt in his mind, that small doubt grew a lot as to whether or not he should bring Barry Trotz back. Do I think it was a mistake? I kind of do in some senses, because especially if you're just changing off to Lane Lambert, who has been Trotz's right-hand man for, about 9 years now, it's almost like having the Barry Trotz system without Barry Trotz, and I don't know how much sense that makes,
Yeah, it's kind of an odd move because I saw that happen in Washington and it failed, I got to say, where they replaced him for Todd Reardon, and that did not go so well. So how do you think that Lane Lambert is going to do? I know that they worked together for many years. I just have a hard time personally seeing that this is going to be an improvement over Barry Trotz.
Well, it depends. We still don't know at this point what tweaks Lane Lambert is going to make to the system. And the impression I have is sort of the foundation of the system is going to remain more or less the same. But like anybody, if you're the vice president and then you become the president, you're not going to do everything the way your predecessor did. There are things you're going to do a little bit differently. It may even be more style over substance. But one of the areas that Barry Trotz did not do well in was developing and using younger players. And I think if Lane Lambert can get more out of an Oliver Wahlstrom, a Kiefer Bellows, maybe Robin Salo if he comes up next year, some of the younger guys developing and getting those younger guys integrated into the lineup and playing bigger roles, that's one area I think that Lane Lambert can certainly improve upon what Barry Trotz did.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not always a failure thing that's going to happen. If you take a look at what the Florida Panthers, they had Quenneville was replaced with his assistant. And I mean, I know they didn't get the result that they wanted to either. So taking a look at the New York Islanders and taking a look at some of the free agents and some moves that need to be made, let's take a look at your netminding situation. Why don't you highlight the two prominent netminders? I know you have Varlamov, which the Washington Capitals are sort of kind of, I think, behind the scenes kicking the tires on if they want to move along from him, reuniting him in the district. Talk to us about the netminding situation. Is that something that needs to be solidified before next season?
I think the Islanders are pretty happy with the netminding situation. You've got two guys who are more than capable of starting in Ilya Sorokin and Semyon Varlamov. So both of them have enjoyed success. Both of them are capable of starting 55, 60 games easily and doing a good job of it. You in Washington are familiar with Varlamov. You mentioned he played there before. He is a solid starter. I think Varlamov has helped Sorokin's development, being a fellow Russian goalie with a lot of experience. But, the question is, as far as this offseason, if the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello are very happy with Sorokin, and I think they are, there's only 1 year left on Varlamov's contract. He has a cap hit of $5 million. You could save, let's say, $3-4 million by getting a less expensive backup and then free up some cap space, trade Varlamov for either a puck-moving defenseman or a goal scorer, or at least maybe, make room to sign a player filling either one of those roles. So that is a possibility, but again, you're weakening one of your stronger positions if you do that move. And I know Lou Lamoriello likes having two starting caliber goalies on his roster if he could help it.
Yeah, maybe you guys would be interested in Ilya Samsonov or Vitek Vanacek, as I know those are two RFAs that the Capitals are perhaps looking to move on from. So just taking a look at what upgrades on your team need to be made. What is your assessment on why the Islanders failed this last season? Was COVID as bad as everyone thought? I kind of looked back on your past season and I saw that a lot of games were scheduled and rescheduled and canceled altogether. What went wrong this past season? It was Barry Trotz hockey. The lineup was pretty solid, I gotta say. What was the thing? Where did the train go off the tracks with the New York Islanders this last season?
The train went off the tracks early in the season, and it was a combination of a few things. First of all, you start the year with a 13-game road trip because they were waiting for the completion of their new home, the UBS Arena. So, it is not easy to play 13 straight road games. And, in the Metropolitan Division, you can play road games that don't take you very far from home. If you're the Islanders, you can play the Rangers, the Devils, even Washington and Philadelphia are, an hour or less by plane where, either you stay overnight or you can just be home the same night, like if you're playing the Rangers or the Devils. But these were 13 real road games. I think they played New Jersey once, and every other trip was a significant road trip. And then as soon as they got to the end of that road trip is when COVID hit, and they played, I would say, half a dozen games where they were 6, 7, 8 players out of the lineup with COVID, and the league did not cancel those games. Then COVID hits. They do cancel a few games. They canceled an entire Canadian road trip to like Edmonton, Calgary, and I think Seattle was the third stop because of COVID restrictions in Canada. I think it was in mid to late November. And so you ended up with all these rescheduled games late in the season where I think they were playing their last 50 games in 100 days or less. And it just got to be a very difficult grind, especially when you consider the Islanders had the oldest roster in the NHL. The other thing beyond COVID, and I think this is more on Lou Lamoriello than it is on Barry Trotz, the Islanders traded Nick Leddy before the season started because they didn't want to lose him for nothing in the expansion draft. And the year before, they traded Devon Taves to free up cap space. So you're looking at two puck-moving defensemen who really help your transition game and your power play. They're both gone, and they replaced Nick Leddy with Zdeno Chara. And I have nothing against Zdeno Chara. I mean, at 45, he's not the player he was in his prime, but still a useful third-pairing defenseman. But they didn't replace Leddy's skill set of skating the puck out of the zone, making that transition pass where you go from defense to offense with momentum and speed in the neutral zone. And as a result, the team struggled to clear their own zone more often, and they didn't have as much of a transition game on offense. And look, the Islanders were challenged to score even before they dealt Nick Leddy. It became an even bigger problem early in the season.
So what is your outlook for next season? I know that, I guess a lot is hinging on what happens with COVID. I know that it's still an issue as I'm dealing with it myself. So what is your outlook for the Islanders next season? Are you hopeful for it, or do you think that they're in a bit of a transition, much like the Capitals? We'll talk about that later in the show. But do the Islanders need to go younger as well? It just seems to be that it's getting to be a faster and younger league out there. Is that the direction you see the Islanders going in?
I think they definitely have to address the puck-moving defenseman issue. So they have two veterans, Andy Green, who I believe is 39, and then Zdeno Chara, who is 45, who may retire. I doubt both of them are back with the Islanders, maybe one of them. But you get rid of those two guys from your roster and the average age goes down dramatically. But yeah, I think they have to get a little bit younger, a little bit faster. And that's where I think Lane Lambert comes in. Lou Lamoriello has indicated he wants to make hockey moves this offseason. And the two things that everybody's been talking about, and I've been talking about on my show regularly, they need a 30-goal-plus goal scorer to team with Matthew Barzal, who is very dynamic, but he's a passer more than a scorer. And then they need that puck-moving defenseman to replace Nick Leddy to help that transition game and increase overall team speed.
All right, so that is the thoughts on the New York Islanders. Now, after the break, I'm going to have Gil ask me his questions about the Washington Capitals. We'll talk about that after the break. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, welcome back. I am joined by Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders and Locked On NHL. And now it's Gil's turn to ask me his questions about the Washington Capitals.
All right, well, let's start in goal because you did mention both Samsonov and Vanacek as people the Capitals may be willing to move on from. How do the Capitals feel about their goaltending, both short-term and long-term, and how do you think they're going to try to address it?
So here's the thing on the netminding situation. I talked to you on one of the first episodes I ever did with you on Locked On NHL about the netminding situation is that Brian McClellan knew the situation the entire season. He knew that Samsonov and Vanacek were an unproven commodity, and he set aside anything, and we just went to the playoffs with that tandem, and we kind of knew it was going to fail, and surprise, surprise, it did. So we have two RFAs, and Samsonov and Vanacek. I think that ultimately the Capitals will part with one of them. For one, I don't think they can afford to pay both of them, and number two, if they go into next season with that tandem again, I think that all the Washington Capitals fan base can feel free to bash their head against the wall because we know the outcome that's going to happen there. So I think that ultimately they will pick one of those two netminders to be the number two, and the Capitals will go out and try to seek that number one netminder. Who that is remains to be seen. I've seen intriguing names like Marc-Andre Fleury, which I don't really see happening just because of the long history between the Penguins and the Golden Knights. I think that, that Penguins' blood runs deep, and I don't think that he would like to play on the Washington Capitals. I think that is a bit of a Hail Mary pass for the Washington Capitals. I don't think they'll make good on that. And then the other one I hear out there is Braden Holtby, for the Washington Capitals fans out there that want to relive the glory days of 2018, try to get the old band back together. I ultimately don't think that is the right thing for the Capitals to do. I think that a lot will depend on training camp. I think they have some great talent in Hershey, their AHL affiliate, in the form of Hunter Shepard and Zach Fucale. Zach Fucale is a guy I kind of banged the drum for all season. We talked about the unproven netminding situation and how poor it was, inconsistent. Why didn't they give him a chance? I think that a lot will be determined in training camp, but that's what I'm saying. They need to pick up that veteran number one, and I think they'll stick with Vanacek or Samsonov as number two.
That does make sense, and obviously, you have your short-term and your long-term. How far off do you think Fucale is from being able to be a backup or a starter in the NHL?
Well, I think, baby steps with everything. I know Braden Holtby got kind of just thrust into the limelight back when he was the ultimate netminder for the Washington Capitals. Honestly, what I would do if I was the GM right now is I would move on from Vanacek and Samsonov, and I know that that's kind of a crazy outside-the-box thing to think, but I think that Fucale is ready for that number two spot on the Washington Capitals. They pick up that number one netminder out there. What is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. So why would Samsonov and Vanacek work next year? That's what I'm saying. Fucale, I think this is his shot to be the number two netminder for the Washington Capitals. He played excellent in Hershey this year, 3 shutouts in a row, and broke all kinds of records when he was on the Washington Capitals. So I think that now is the time for Zach Fucale.
Alexander Ovechkin will be 37 years old in September before the start of the next season. He doesn't show very many signs of slowing down right now, but do you think the Capitals need to rebuild this team around him, or are they going to go all in to try to get one more or two more runs at a cup before Ovechkin starts to get a little older and tail off in the quality of his play?
I'd like them to rebuild right now, to be honest with you, because I think it's kind of putting off the inevitable. If you take a look at what the New York Rangers did, they did a rebuild, and I think it was a year and a half that they were poor. But look at them now; they just are playing so well in the playoffs right now. But as far as the Washington Capitals are concerned, there were certain agreements made to Alex Ovechkin that he would play on a competitive team. So I don't think it's going to be a total blow up, tear it down to the studs. I think, according to Ted Leonsis, that it's going to be a retool, which I understand is a bit of semantics there. But I think what they're going to do is they're going to try to slowly integrate some young players from Hershey. And I think that they'll also try to pick up some of those big veteran players. But as far as Alex Ovechkin, the biggest concern I think for him is that his right-hand man, Nick Backstrom, suffered a major hip injury, and he even toyed around with the idea of a retirement. I think that would be devastating for the Capitals and most notably Alex Ovechkin. But to answer your question, I think that the Capitals will go with what Ted Leonsis said is a rebuild or a retool, excuse me. And I think that might mean moving on from big name players on the team that we've grown to love, like TJ Oshie or perhaps a John Carlson. Because ultimately, if you're going to get a big haul, if you're going to get a big player, you're going to have to give up a big player. You're not going to get a big player for a fourth line player. So I think that it's looming, and kind of the consensus out there is if something doesn't happen this season, which I've heard for the last couple seasons, then there's going to be a big change. But that remains to be seen.
And who are some of the players in the system right now who, you said Leonsis is saying they're going to bring some of these guys up. Who are some of the guys you have your eye on, and how far off are they from being ready to contribute?
So Alexiev, a defenseman for Hershey, and Lucas Johansson, both two defensemen that, they always make camp, but they always end up, not making the big team. But I think they ultimately are doing that in favor for the veterans. But I think that they're kind of, coming to the school of thought that they need to go younger. So I think that Alexiev or Lucas Johansson, this could be the big season for him. But they also have had some great seasons for Martin Feravari. Connor McMichael has also played fairly well in a limited capacity. So I think that you could look to see Connor McMichael take on a bigger role, perhaps filling in for Lars Eller, who I think the Capitals will move on from. So I think that Connor McMichael fits in there, but there's a lot of different players that played on the Capitals last season that were from Hershey, but it wasn't sustainable. They had Leeson and Protas and some different players like that. Hendrix Lapierre is a big one to look out for the Washington Capitals. A little bit younger, but I think that he is probably maybe a year or so off from being on the big team. But there are big things brewing for the Capitals. It's just one of the things that's kind of setting them back is they were always in win now mode. And as we all know, win now mode means kind of kicking the can down the road, giving up the draft picks or the big name player to get someone else bigger. But I think that they're going to get younger here sooner than later.
And you mentioned, in addition to bringing some players up, they would be looking to acquire some veterans. Who do you feel, or if not specific names, what types of players, what positions are they looking to add most?
So I think they need to add some depth as defensemen are concerned, and that they need some to help on some depth on the forward line as well. Listen, this is the crazy season out there, and I've heard everything from Johnny Gaudreau to all these different types of names out there. But when you look at it, it's the crazy season. You throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. But I think that the Washington Capitals, I think they're going to make a big splash. Do I think they're going to land someone like Kadri or Johnny Hockey? I don't know, but I think that it's definitely possible. The Washington Capitals have a pedigree of winning. So I think that they serve as good a chance as anyone else. But I think that you will see some big splashes in this offseason.
If John Carlson is not back, and you mentioned him as a potential person who they may move on from, who becomes the top puck-moving defenseman on this roster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that Dmitry Orlov has some offensive flair to him. Martin Feravari has shown it as well. But kind of what I was talking about before, they have Alexiev and Lucas Johansson, both guys that show some promise. But as far as someone that moves the puck really well, I would say that like a Dmitry Orlov has some good offensive touch to him as well. That's just me speculating on John Carlson. Many people are saying, no, you can't give him up. But change has to be made at some point. So I think that they may move on from a John Carlson. I guess time will tell on that.
And just to sort of sum it up, this will be a successful offseason for the Washington Capitals
It'll be if they pick up that veteran netminder. I think that is the first thing they need to check off their list and then kind of fan out from there. Then I think they pick up that veteran defenseman and also some veteran forwards in there as well. Just because, like I say, we saw what they had this season, and I think that they need to move forward. A lot also hinges on Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson, who had knee surgery. I think that is one of the big concerns for the Washington Capitals, as well as who slots in for him. I've heard Anthony Mantha might move up in the lineup. So there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of it is contingent on injury, to be honest with you.
Always is, especially when you have a veteran team. That is always a bigger factor.
All right. So after the break here, we are going to talk about a little bit about the Capitals and the Islanders and the rivalry that has gone on for years between them. We'll talk about that after the break. All right. Welcome back in this special crossover edition of Locked On Capitals, Locked On Islanders. I am joined once again by Gil Martin, and let's talk a little bit about the rivalry that goes on between these two teams. It seems like they've faced each other quite a few times in the playoffs. The last time was the two teams met again in the playoffs was the 2021 Eastern Conference first round, where the Islanders won the series 4-1. After that series, the Capitals head coach Todd Reirden was fired. There is quite a playoff history, and I was going to talk a little bit about that, about just teams that have quite a history together in the playoffs. What do you remember about the Washington Capitals and the Islanders in the playoffs? It seems like, and I have the history on it here, that the Washington Capitals postseason has it 25-17 New York Islanders. So looking over historically, the Islanders have done better than the Capitals in the playoffs when playing each other. What are your recollections of the Capitals versus the Islanders?
To me, the biggest, most memorable game, and it may be one of the most memorable games in Islanders history, the Easter Epic. I believe it was 1987, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember this game because I was in college at the time, and it was on a Saturday night that the game started. It ended early Sunday morning. I watched the first two periods, went out with some friends, came back and was shocked that the game was still on, and then watched all the overtime periods after that. And I think it ended around 1:45 in the morning. Just an outstanding game. And I remember both goaltenders just standing on their heads, and it was a game 7. It was a great series, and I felt very bad for Bob Mason, who was the goalie for the Capitals, because he played his heart out and ended up giving up, the winning goal in triple overtime. But what a game. If you ever want to see a game where both teams just played their hearts out and played hockey at a very high level for, almost 2 complete games as far as minutes are concerned, that to me is just an outstanding moment and an outstanding game. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, just talking about that, a bitter rivalry between these two teams. It just goes back and forth, and always just a big physical game. I mean, you had Clutterbuck on there. I remember him throwing around a bunch of the Capitals. Anytime those two teams meet each other in the playoffs, you know that it's always going to be a chippy game. This even goes back to the 2015. Both the teams ended in 2015 with Washington winning the series 4-3. Since this series, the rivalry has been fiercely reignited, showing through the remainder of the 2010s into the 2020s. And that's kind of what I remember. I remember more the recent ones, the last couple of times they played together, but always a physical game is what I remember. They always have the games just really dialed in physically. Kind of going back to the one that you were talking about in 1987, the teams had one of the most memorable playoffs in NHL history. The Capitals won Game 1 by a score of 4-3 before the Islanders won the next 2 games 3-1 to tie the series. When the series shifted to New York, the Capitals took control, winning the next 2 games by a score of 2-0 and 4-1 to take a 3-1 series lead. And I do not recall watching that game. I was a little bit young at the time. But that's something I'll have to go back and look on. It's probably on YouTube or something like that. But just a real physical game every time they play together. So, Gil, once again, thank you for joining me on this special crossover edition of Locked On Capitals and Locked On Islanders. It's been great to join me. Tell me a little bit about where we can find your work, your podcast. I know you work on Locked On, of course, but give us a little plug for your show.
Well, Locked On Islanders is available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. So check us out and subscribe there. I also do Locked On NHL Mondays and Fridays, as we talked about earlier. And you could follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Isles, and you could follow me on Twitter at Ice Wars NYR VSNYI. And Ice Wars is the title of the book I wrote on the history of the Islanders' rivalry with the Rangers.
That sounds like something that's worth checking out as well. You're a very accomplished person. You're a writer and you're doing all these podcasts. I think that we'll have to look into your work a little bit more here. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals and Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On NHL covers the playoffs like no other. Hear the latest news and opinions from our local experts every Monday through Friday. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. So once again, Gil, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals and Islanders.